On that moonless night, Joe and I found ourselves on a desolate stretch of highway, cocooned by an impenetrable darkness that devoured our car's feeble headlights. We'd been driving for hours, our only companions the eerie shadows cast by the dashboard's dim glow. Suddenly, a lone figure materialized ahead, emerging from the abyss like a specter. The hitchhiker stood still, a forsaken soul in tattered rags, as if he'd wandered from the very depths of the night itself. Joe's voice trembled with uncertainty, his eyes darting between me and the mysterious stranger. Should we pick him up? My heart fluttered with hesitation, but a pang of compassion nudged me forward. Yes, we should. He might need our help. As we rolled down the window, the hitchhiker leaned in, his face obscured by the hood of his ragged jacket, his eyes veiled in shadow. "Thank you for stopping," he muttered, his voice a chilling whisper. "I've been walking for miles." I exchanged an uneasy glance with Joe but motioned for the stranger to enter. As he settled into the back seat, a haunting silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the relentless tap of rain against the car's windows. The hitchhiker introduced himself as Victor, and as the miles passed, he began to weave a sinister narrative. His stories transformed, taking us into the depths of isolation, where unsettling disappearances plagued remote towns and eerie, unexplainable events unfolded in forgotten forests. My disquiet deepened, but Joe hung on Victor's every word. "You've had some remarkable experiences out there," Joe exclaimed, entranced by Victor's tales. Victor's lips curled into a sinister grin, barely visible in the car's dim interior. "Oh, you have no idea. The things I've seen, the things I've done." My heart pounded, and I exchanged a nervous glance with Joe. Victor's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "You know," Victor continued, his voice dripping with malevolence, "sometimes, people just vanish, without a trace. And the best part? No one ever suspects a thing." Joe swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What do you mean?" Victor leaned closer, his icy breath brushing against Joe's ear. "I mean, I'm the reason they vanish. I've left a trail of bodies in my wake, and no one's ever caught me." Fear surged within me as I realized we were trapped in the car with a remorseless killer. Victor's tales of murder and mayhem grew increasingly horrifying, his voice oozing sadistic pleasure. As we sped down the highway, a sign ahead caught my eye: "Next rest stop, 10 miles." I exchanged a desperate look with Joe and whispered, "We need to get out of this car." We devised a plan to pull over at the rest stop and escape. As we neared the exit, Joe pretended to reach for something in the backseat, allowing me to veer the car off the road and into a thicket of trees. The sudden jolt sent Victor tumbling, and before he could react, Joe and I were sprinting into the darkness. Behind us, Victor roared in anger and cursed. We heard his relentless footsteps, closing in with every passing second. Panic set in, and we ran as if our lives depended on it. We reached the rest stop, a dimly lit oasis with a small building. As we burst into the dimly lit rest stop, a wave of relief washed over us momentarily. The small building offered some semblance of refuge from the nightmare we'd inadvertently stepped into. But our relief was short-lived, for the night was far from over. The attendant emerged from the back room, her eyes widening in alarm as she took in our frantic appearance. We quickly explained the perilous situation, barely able to catch our breath between words. Just as we were about to dial the police, the eerie stillness outside was shattered by Victor's chilling voice, echoing ominously through the night. "You can run, but you can't hide." Joe and I exchanged frantic glances, dread pooling in our stomachs. There was no time to wait for the police. We needed to act now. Suddenly, the lights flickered and dimmed, casting eerie shadows across the room. Panic surged anew as we realized Victor was tampering with the power supply. The attendant rushed to a nearby emergency exit, urging us to follow. As we bolted toward the exit, the lights went out completely, plunging us into pitch darkness. The nightmarish chase began. In the blackness, we stumbled and crashed into shelves, our frantic breaths echoing off the walls. Victor's sinister laughter rang out from the shadows, his footsteps approaching rapidly. It was a macabre game of cat and mouse, with our lives hanging in the balance. Joe and I separated, hoping to confuse our pursuer. My heart pounded, and I strained to hear any hint of Victor's whereabouts. The sound of his boots echoed menacingly, coming closer and closer. Then, a chilling sensation crept up my spine as I realized he was right behind me. I spun around just in time to evade his outstretched hand, narrowly avoiding his grasp. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I sprinted in the opposite direction, desperately trying to reunite with Joe and the attendant. In the darkness, the rest stop seemed like a labyrinth of fear, and every corner concealed the lurking threat of Victor. We knew we couldn't outrun him forever, but we had to keep trying. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, and my heart sank. It was the attendant. She had encountered Victor, and her cries were laced with terror. Joe and I followed her desperate pleas, guided by the sound of their struggle. We arrived just in time to witness a horrific sight. Victor, his face contorted with malevolence, had cornered the attendant. In his hand, he brandished a gleaming knife, stained with the ominous promise of violence. With a chilling smile, Victor thrust the blade forward, and the attendant's scream was abruptly silenced. Her body crumpled to the floor, a lifeless heap in the darkened room. Joe and I stood frozen in terror, our hearts pounding as we confronted the grim reality of Victor's brutality. The night had descended into a nightmare of unspeakable horror, and we were trapped in its clutches. With the attendant's life extinguished, Victor turned his attention back to us, his eyes gleaming with sadistic triumph. "You can't escape," he hissed, raising the blooded knife, ready to continue the relentless pursuit. Our desperate fight for survival continued, but now, it was tainted by the chilling knowledge that Victor would stop at nothing to claim his prey. The rest stop had become a nightmarish battleground, and the shadows concealed a remorseless killer with an insatiable thirst for blood. In that suffocating darkness, Joe and I were faced with a gruesome reality: we had to confront Victor head-on. There was no way out of this nightmare unless we could overpower the sadistic killer who now had a taste for blood. With grim determination, we moved in unison, our steps cautious yet resolute. Victor's malevolent laughter echoed through the room, his eyes dancing with madness as he brandished the blood-stained knife, ready for another strike. The odds were stacked against us, but fear had turned into a searing rage. We couldn't let Victor continue his reign of terror. Together, we lunged at him, hoping to catch him off guard. Our collective weight knocked Victor to the ground, his knife clattering out of reach. A desperate struggle ensued, the three of us locked in a vicious tangle of limbs and wills. Adrenaline coursed through our veins, fueling our determination to subdue this monstrous threat. With sheer determination, Joe managed to pin Victor down, while I frantically searched for the knife. It was a chaotic and terrifying battle, but the stakes were too high for us to falter. Finally, my fingers closed around the cold metal of the blade. With trembling hands, I pried it free from the darkness and pointed it at Victor. He struggled and fought, his eyes wild with rage, but he was no match for our desperation to survive. In that harrowing moment, I knew what had to be done. With a surge of courage, I drove the knife into Victor's side. He let out a guttural cry, his laughter replaced by a horrifying scream of pain. But Victor, even in his agony, was undeterred. He mocked me with blood-smeared lips, calling me weak and feeble. His laughter, though now tinged with suffering, sent chills down my spine. Joe, his face contorted with anger, stood up abruptly. Without hesitation, he delivered a powerful kick to Victor's head, sending the sadistic killer into unconsciousness. Victor's sinister reign was over, at least for now. The police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Our tormentor was defeated, and justice was on its way. We held Victor at knife point until the officers finally arrived. Victor was apprehended and the attendant's lifeless body bore witness to the horrors of that night, a stark reminder of the darkness that had descended upon us. As the police took Victor into custody, his malevolent gaze locked with ours one last time, filled with a chilling promise of revenge. But we were no longer the helpless victims we had been earlier in the night. We had faced the darkest of horrors and emerged from it, scarred but victorious. The night would forever haunt our dreams, a twisted tale of survival and the relentless pursuit of evil. But in its wake, we had found a strength we never knew we possessed, a strength born from the depths of fear and forged in the fires of a nightmarish cat-and-mouse chase.